Hello, and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. I'm really excited for this show. This idea has been on our idea list for a while. And it's really, it really kind of flips the script a little bit on your marketing. And I hope for many of you, this is going to be a real eye-opener, because that's always the purpose of our shows. Is your buyer your reader? And many times authors don't really stand still by this. They don't really think about, well, of course my reader is my buyer. And that's not always the case. And we're going to cite some examples and some solutions and things like that. But the origin story of this podcast actually started 23 years ago when I was first in business. And I had an author who wrote a book. Basically, the premise of the book was why good men fall for bad women, right? And so I told this author at the time, I said, well, first off, men don't, with all due respect to all the guys out there listening, men don't generally buy self-help. That's not the primary self-help market. But because this author was originally like, they were trying to go after the male market, like, oh, we want to get into men's magazines, we want to do all this other stuff. And sure, you could potentially get some play there. But the low-hanging fruit for a book like this is going to be the moms, the sisters, the girlfriends, even maybe the neighbor who has seen the guy sleep on the porch for the third night in a row or whatever. I mean, right? So yeah. So that was kind of how that's how we came on this idea. And I thought, what would probably be a really good idea to address this, because I think it's not just an example of the self-help book written for men, but there's a lot more out there, in particular children's books. Amy, do you want to speak to that? Because I know we just got done with kind of a heated debate about, not heated in a bad way, but about how children's books are often positioned.
Yes. And, it's good. I love that we're doing this, Penny, too, because this is something that we regularly put ourselves through, this kind of like workshopping when we do media for clients and any sort of pitching, because you have to really make sure you uncover all the opportunities. And a lot of times that's when we come to the realization that, like, okay, they've got potential buyers here that are not the reader. How are we going to reach those people too? So that's what we're trying to kind of let y'all in on. But yes, when it comes to children's books, I was telling Penny, I have kids. I was not telling Penny that. Sorry. Surprise, Penny, I have kids. But no, I have kids. And I was telling Penny that it drives me nuts when I see children's books that I'm potentially shopping for that have overly vague and cutesy descriptions that don't really tell me anything about the book. Because it's like, if I'm going to buy it for my kid, I want to know what I'm getting into. And especially, there are plenty of books out there, and I see this even more with children's books, where the look inside feature is not available as well, Penny. So if they're not, published through Amazon, you can't always check out what the inside looks like, or a sample page or anything. Right. It happens a lot with children's books. And so if the description is also vague or silly or written as if my 8-year-old is shopping, I usually move on, because it's like, I don't know what it's about. I don't know what they're going to learn. I don't know what the cool catch is or what the unique, aspects of this book that make it different than, a bunch of other books we already have on the shelf. But in that case, so that's a perfect example also of tell the parent why your book makes sense, even if it's for silly reasons. That's, something uniquely silly is 100% worthy of my money and my kids' time, but make it a big deal. Let me know what it is about your book that makes it different,
Right. Exactly. And I think that books that are that a person that you might think about. So you really have to, so we did a show on how readers find books. And I think you really have to think about what's the path of discoverability to getting your book in, and is your reader actually on that path? So the children's book is a great example, the book about, the guys choosing bad women who make them sleep out on the porch or whatever. That's another example. But another one is, grief, coping, loss, books about loss. A lot of times you'll find that people who are entrenched in something like that aren't necessarily shopping for a book on grief or coping or whatever that is, right? So that's another piece of it that you might, and to be fair, there may be a buyer market for you where you go direct to the reader. But I think the real purpose of this is not just to get you to stop marketing to your reader, because that's not the goal, but to consider who all of your buyers really are, right? Because
Yes.
in the case of the children's book, I mean, that's kind of obvious, but then like you gave the example when we were in the green room about new adult nonfiction specifically. Do you want to talk about that for a
Mhm.
minute?
Yeah, new adult, getting started, setting up your first home, even going off to college. Like there's a lot of big firsts that happen in life, even buying your first home. And again, I think Penny, you made a very good point that when you are the person that's in the thick of all that, be it good, bad, exciting, otherwise, a lot of times, it's not people's first thing on the list to be also shopping for books. So a lot of times these are things that, are gifted to someone. So
Yeah.
any big first in life topics, you know, even starting your own first, like you're starting your own business. Yes, you should be doing your research, but anybody that has started their own business and has been successful in their own business sees the value potentially in what your book has to offer. So they may buy it. They may recommend it when they see it. You know what I mean? So to your point, think outside of the box in terms of who all could potentially be recommending and or buying my book. And what are the different ways I can anchor my promotions, my marketing to all of those people? So you're not leaving really strong potential buyers on the table.
Well, and I think that if you have, to your point about starting a business, so when I started my business, I wasn't buying books on how to start your business because I just assumed that I knew all the things, which I know sounds really cocky.
Right.
But I was, because anybody that's listened to the show for a while knows that, self-help is my like positive thinking. That's totally my jam. Like I love that stuff. So that's what I was kind of immersing myself in. And had somebody come to me and say, this is a really good book about just some basics about starting your business. Like I probably could have avoided, you know, the early business mistakes, which now are probably too embarrassing to share on the podcast. But, you know, so just some of this
Yeah.
stuff, you know what I mean? So I think that it's not necessarily that you have to, in some cases, you want to realign your marketing. So just to go back, I don't mean to belabor the children's books, but that's an example of don't write for the child, write for the parent. You know what I mean? That's really your
Hmm.
target. But in some cases, like when I first, when I switched over from a PC to a Mac to an all Apple platform, which I'm really, really glad that I did. I was kind of the same way where I was like, oh, I can do all the things, I can figure out all the things. And then at some point you really realize you're like, oh, I can't really do all the things. And somebody gave me or recommended to me a book on you know, making the switch from the PC to Apple, which surprisingly, there's actually a book for that. And those are the kinds of things that you sort of want to think about, which doesn't necessarily, I mean, and you could also say that, like, for example, housewarming books might fall into this, but housewarming books, I mean, even though I know I put that in the show notes, that's also a little bit broad, right? So, a cookbook could be a housewarming book.
Hmm.
Though, you know what I mean?
Like a lifestyle book. So hobbies, anything having to do with, certain
yeah.
lifestyle interests and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to definitely have a dual reader, but I mean, I think that, and Amy, I'm going to let you speak to the book description. To me, if I had a book, so let's say we were marketing a book for, big firsts in life. So setting up your first home or, leaving for college and, all this other stuff. I mean, I would do a dual market, right?
Hmm.
I would go after the parents and then I would also go after, the kid going off to college. I guess not really kid, but I would do a dual market. And so that's another thing to think about too, is that um the obvious market may not necessarily be you maybe want to invest some time there, but it may not necessarily be your best market, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so in some cases, like the grief, coping, and loss, somebody going through that might buy your book. So, you definitely don't want to overlook that. And getting your book mentioned on platforms about loss or coping or life changes, things like that would be great. But then considering, going after places where people are going to see the book as potentially to help somebody out. Because
Right.
any of the grief books that we've ever worked on, that's one of the top things that the authors always tell us is that they really want to go after the people who can gift the book because that's their primary market, right?
Right. Hmm.
Um,
And yeah.
go ahead.
Well, and you mentioned, book description. I think that has a lot to do with what you're saying too, is and why. And we did an episode on book descriptions specifically for nonfiction recently and gave a lot of tips for things that are often overlooked, the importance. And I think this is another one where when you have dual markets, make sure that that's represented in your book description. And I think it's really important to get a second set of eyes, have other people read it. You know what I mean? You get too close to your own work, but you want to make sure that it's making sense for your different potential buyers, readers, dual markets, things like that. I'm a big fan. If you feel very strongly that your book will be a gift or purchased by someone else, for another individual, lay it all out there. Put that in your book description. There's no reason to be subtle about that. So whether it's a gift for like a happy occasion or a gift because you think it will help somebody, put that in your description.
Yeah.
And that's also a really great opportunity to reiterate who this book was designed for, not who's going to buy it, but who it's designed for. This makes an excellent gift for X, Y, and Z. Give people examples because Penny, you and I talk about it all the time. The less thinking people have to do, the more likely they are to click buy.
Yep.
So if you connect all those dots for them in your description, if you let them know what the benefits are, if you let them know who you wrote the book for, and put that in your description, then you are much more likely to actually make that sale because they will see themselves or they will see that other individual represented in your description and you're good to go. And you're much more likely to get.
Oh my gosh. So I'm so sorry. I'm breaking in here. We had to pause the show because Amy is having some pretty bad weather and some big tornado warnings in your area. So is everything okay there?
Seems to be just fine, but yeah, I'm getting texts from the school system. My one of my dogs was trying to break in to the room I'm in because she wants to sleep under my desk. The other dog, for what it's worth, in case anybody's really concerned, is perfectly content laying in his bed. So it's been a day of weather, but it's fine. This is part of living in the South.
I love how, because when we paused recording, because Amy basically she cut out because I think of the weather there, whatever, the system. And it was like, are you sure you don't want to hop off? Because I'm in Southern California. We don't do weather. I would be hiding in a bathtub right now. Literally.
I know it's one of those like all in a day things.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
you're such a brave weather person. Anyway, all right, so let's finish up with your thought on this.
Yes. So basically, my point being when it comes to the descriptions, if y'all didn't pick up on it already, connect the dots. I think that's a really good thing to remember. Connect the dots, and a reader that is not at all confused or unsure, a shopper, I should say, is much more likely to buy. So if it's a good gift, if you'd want somebody referring another person to this book, whether it's a colleague or something like that, call it out in your description. Don't be subtle about it. Throw it right out there and say, this would be an excellent book for X, Y, and Z. People will see that and they'll think, you're right, this would be, and I know somebody this would be the perfect book for this individual in my life.
I think that's really great. I think that's smart, and I hope that we have, other than giving you the tornado warning update, I hope that we have inspired you to really dig in and figure out, because let's face it, selling books is hard. I was listening, actually, Amy, you sent me a update, this blog post that this guy wrote that there's a book published every 8 seconds in this country. So the majority of them, unfortunately, are not listening to this podcast. But if you forward the podcast to your friends, we will get that many listeners. But the majority of authors are not looking for multiple buyer markets. And that's really the purpose of this show. And frankly, the inspiration for a lot of the shows that we do. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.